Hi, my name is Vasti Iglesias, and I will be doing my presentation on Mary Church Terrell. My name is Mary Church Terrell. I was born in 1863. I'm an educator, a writer, and a civil rights activist. I was a professor and a principal at Wilberforce University, and I was the first Black woman appointed to the District of Columbia Board of Education in 1895. In 1896, I became the president of the newly formed National Association of Colored Women. I was a writer with many foreign papers, and I would occasionally write for the Washington Post. In 1904, I spoke at an International Congress of Women held in Germany, and I became a founding member for the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. In 1940, I released an autobiography entitled A Colored Woman in a White World, where I then, in my years, helped develop and organize a creative activity in Washington, D.C. I was one of the first Black women to get a college degree in the U.S., and I got my bachelor's in the classics from Oberlin College, and then I proceeded to get my master's in 1888. In 1882, I was elected the president for the Black debate organization known as the Bethel Literary and Historical Society. Not only was I elected president, but I was the first woman to take this position. Years later, I became an honorary member at the Howard University sorority known as the Delta Sigma Theta in 1948. I was born as Mary E. Church to a family of former slaves in Tennessee. My parents were divorced, but I still thought of it as a supportive and cordial arrangement, even though my dad did get remarried to somebody else. I studied in Ohio, where my father made the decision to get a higher education in the same area. I was voted the class poet and involved in literary society and given access to singers, orchestras, and treated extremely well by my professors. Even after the color of my skin, I always tried to take the opportunity that I was given, and I even visited the Washington, D.C. and met my friend Frederick Douglass. After graduating, I began working at Wilberforce University, and I only stayed for 2 years until I was offered a position at a colored high school in Washington, D.C. I began working in the foreign language department. I took a 2-year leave of absence in 1888 after finishing my master's to start traveling in Europe to further my language competency. I went to places such as France, Italy, and Germany throughout Europe. Once arriving to Washington, D.C., I continued to work alongside Robert Herbert, who is now Robert Herbert Terrell, and the relationship became extremely personal. We got married in 1881, but in the first 5 years of marriage, we were very sad once we had 3 children die after birth. In 1895, I was appointed to one of the 3 positions reserved for women. I was the first Black woman of the board, and after 6 years, I decided it was time for me to leave due to my husband becoming the school principal because I knew it would be a conflict of interest. Even though, after all these things I was doing, I still continued to attend the National Women's Suffrage Association meetings, and I actually became friends with Susan B. Anthony. A few times I was able to speak out on the topic on colored women, and it wasn't until I founded my own Colored Women's League of Washington, and I became an organizer alongside of being a teacher. I really hope to merge the National Federation of African American Women for the National Association of Colored Women, also known as the NACW, in 1896. I was elected the first president of this organization and then elected again for my second term. I later had 2 daughters, and I ended up managing a family with Robert in the middle of me still wanting to teach and speak out. My husband sadly passed away in 1925, and this left me heartbroken. I spent the rest of my time living in Washington, D.C. because this is where I spent most of my time growing up and aging, and I love to live here the most out of everywhere else that I stayed. I got myself involved in a political campaign of Ruth Hannah McCormick, who was running for the Senate seat in Illinois, and then I was later told that the Republican National Committee during my Hoover campaign. In 1940, I released an autobiography, Colored Women in a White World. One of the last chapters in this book described carrying on and staying active even though that I was aging. My age never affected the amount of ambition I have and the way that I love to be an activist and care for the others in my community, especially the colored lives. I won awards like the Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters in 1948 and other honorary awards and degrees from Howard University as well as Wilberforce University, and they only motivated me to do more. In 1950, me and some of my colleagues became the earliest activist groups in a new place for civil rights. Then a lawsuit was filed against one of the restaurants because the establishment refused to serve us because of our race, and the desegregation in Washington, D.C. was officially put up to a challenge. It was described as unconstitutional in 1953, and I helped organize pickets and boycotts and different things for the city that led up to the ruling. My leadership was definitely a key in my early court battle to help desegregate America because I care so much for it. I successfully worked for the National Association of University Women to help admit Blacks while I was in my age of my 80s. I worked hard for the women's suffrage movement, as well as Black women and the Black culture as a whole. And I work hard my whole life to be contributing to the Black community. Thank you. That was my presentation.